Good morning everyone, and welcome to the webinar on how to write a speech. This webinar comes from several sources. Quite often people ask me when they're in my presentation skills workshops, but how do you craft a speech? How do you write a speech? Where do you begin? So I've also written a workbook called the Killer Speech Writing Workbook and also an audio CD. So I'm deciding to run a webinar based on the workbook, so it just gives you a snapshot of this particular workbook. Of course, the workbook, complete with the audio CD, is also available for sale on my website if later on you are interested, and you can use it over and over again every time you have to write a speech. A little bit about myself. Peter Jew's my name. Most of you know me, although I do see a couple of new names. I'm a public speaking trainer and coach, and my passion is helping people find their voice, helping people to be more confident and more effective, so they've got the ability to get their point of view across. They have the confidence to stand up and speak at meetings, in seminars, in forums, so they can say what's important to them. So that's my passion. My background, for those of you who don't know, is that I'm a person who stutters, so I've spent a lot of my life avoiding public speaking, having things to say and not saying them, not having the courage, I guess for fear of stuttering, but also for fear of being judged, being invited to speak at conferences and being invited to present and saying no because of my inability to do public speaking, my fear of being in the spotlight. So that's where I come from, and that's my passion, making sure that no one else goes through that, I guess, that block or that inability to contribute the way that you want because of fear of public speaking. Okay, how to write a speech. So today's workshop, ask questions as we go. Please don't wait. You can type into the dialogue box at any stage. You have that little question box. The other thing that we can do is, if you have got a headset and a microphone, raise your hand and I will open up your microphone. Then you can ask the question and everyone across the webinar will hear it. If you're not comfortable doing that, then feel free to type in the question dialogue box and I will get to you. Please take notes, please participate, and also think about the content. And I've also mentioned in this one, have a speech in mind. So do you have something coming up? Next year I've got my oldest daughter's wedding, so I obviously have a wedding speech coming up. In December I'm presenting an award to Curtin University for students, so I have a speech coming up. It'll only be about 5 to 6 minutes, but I have to present that speech. So as we go through the content, don't be afraid to frame it or put in the context of a real speech that you've got coming up, a real task. That for me is so much better than just the hypothetical. So participate, ask questions as we go. Periodically I will also stop and ask for questions at this stage. So there's about 4 stages within the webinar that I'm going to stop and ask from you, are there anyone who has any questions? Okay. What are we going to cover today? Where do you start? So you have to present at a conference. You've got your daughter's wedding speech. How do you start? What's your core message? What's the one thing that people will remember? How do you open? When you're writing or scripting your opening, how should it begin? What does it contain? The other end, how do you close your concluding statements? In the middle of your speech, what 3 or 4 points are you going to use? You're going to use stories, you're going to use your anecdotes, your examples to illustrate your points, to build out your core message. Which stories do you use? And putting all this into a safe and simple structure and a safe and simple process that you can use every time you know you've got a speech coming up. And such a simple structure that you'll be able to, assuming you know your content well, you'll be able to put a speech together within 5 to 10 minutes. Depending on the length of time and the complexity. So let's get started. Where do you begin? Where do you start? really the way to start is start at the end. Start at the end of your presentation. So if I'm listening to you present, and as I'm walking out of the door, ask yourself these questions. So you're starting at the end. What do you want to happen at the end of your presentation? What changes do you want to make in me, the audience? Changes in my knowledge, changes in my thinking, changes in my behaviour. How do you want me to feel as I walk out? And there's this wonderful saying, the audience won't necessarily remember what you said. However, what the audience will remember is how you made them feel. So while you're giving information and while you're scripting information into your presentation, you also need to have space for the emotional journey, the emotional roller coaster ride that you will be taking your audience on, because it's the feeling that they walk out at the end, the feeling that they walk out with, that's going to have the bigger impact. And yes, they will have the knowledge because you will have given them the points that they need, but you need the emotions as well. So what do you want them to feel? What new knowledge must they know at the end of that presentation? And then finally, putting it all into context, as they leave your presentation, what do you want to be at the forefront of their mind? So as I'm walking up the stairs and out the door, what do you want me to take with me? What feeling, what emotion do you want to take with you? If you go to a football game, you want people walking out at the end of that game thoroughly entertained, engaged, and their team has had a fantastic win. If you've been to a concert, people want to walk out feeling they've got value for money. It was a really good and exciting and entertaining conference. At a seminar, you want them to walk out thinking that they can do this. Yes, there is hope. I'm not as stuck as I was before this seminar, depending on what you want them to walk out with. So this is where you start. It's kind of clarifying what you want the audience to walk away with. So don't worry about starting with the beginning or the middle or the end. Start with what you want the audience to do. That's the clarity of your purpose in delivering this presentation. And with the entertainers and with the sports people, clarity of their purpose is around the entertainment. As a speaker, as a trainer, you're probably less entertainment, more on content, more on new knowledge, more on changing behaviour. So that's where you begin. Any questions at this stage? Just going to pause for a moment. For those of you who joined a little bit late, put your hand up in the control box and I'll open up your microphone, or type directly into the dialog box. Thanks, Karen. What's your question? Thanks, Karen. What was your question, sorry? I can't hear you, sorry. Okay, can I get you to type the question in? Please, Karen. Microphone not working there. So there's a little dialog box that everyone should have. If it's closed, you'll just see a red arrow. When you click on the red arrow, it should open up, and then there's a question box, and just type your questions in. No questions. Thank you for asking. Okay, we've clarified that. So maybe the hand up went up by accident, Karen. I do apologise. Okay. The next thing, now that you've worked out what you want to happen, you need to seek clarity around your core message. So how I define the core message is, without a doubt or unequivocally, what is it that you want me to remember as a result of hearing you speak? So think of it this way. Let's say you've presented and someone bumps into you in the Hay Street Mall in Perth 3 months after you've spoken, and they come up to you and they tell you how much they loved your presentation, and they tell you what your core message is. What is it that you want people to remember 3 months from now? So they're not going to remember 2 or 3 things. They're not going to remember 4 or 5 things. They're going to remember one. They're going to have one big impression. This is your core message. So in reaching your core message, this is how you can get there. Ask yourself these 2 questions. What do I want them to remember in 3 months' time? What do I want them to take away? I sometimes in my workshops have people do presentations using this structure. I then go to different people in the audience and say, what was that person's core message? And what you find is different people give different core messages or have a different interpretation of what the core message was. I can then go back to the speaker, the presenter, and say, look, you're giving out your audience mixed messages. Someone might think that the message is, we need to conserve our water resources in Western Australia. We need to save our water. And then another audience member say, well, no, I think he meant we need to find more water sources. We need to, have more dams. We need to do more desalination plants. We need to find more sources of water. Now, either one's a valid key message. The question is, what did you want them to remember as your core message? Try not to give mixed messages or messages that are a little bit loose and open to interpretation. The second question is, why does it matter to them? And this is the what's in it for me as an audience member. What's in it for me when I listen to you? How are you answering my problem, my difficulty? How are you solving the pain or the concerns that I have? How are you addressing those issues for me? Because if you're not addressing any of my issues, if you're not helping me gain success, meet my goals or eliminate my problems, then you are just an entertaining speaker. You're not delivering anything for me to take away. The content is of no value to your audience. So always answer those 2 questions. If you don't have a core message, then why are you presenting? If your core message doesn't really matter to the audience, why are you presenting to that audience? Maybe you think they need to hear it, but if they're not ready to receive it, or it's not couched or crafted in a way that addresses some issues, then once again, you're a stand-up comedian, you're an entertaining speaker. Even if you're an inspirational speaker, inspirational speakers generally have a message that has something for the audience to walk away with, some knowledge and skills that they can apply to their own life to make their life better or to alleviate some issues. So that's how you arrive at your core message. So before doing fancy structures and writing lots of notes, answer these 2 questions. What, without a doubt, do I want them to remember? And why does it matter to them? Why do they care? I'm passionate about this as a speaker, but why do they care? Answer those 2 questions. And you'll go a long way to having a really tight core message. So how do you open? This is the first 30 to 60 seconds, and your opening can be 15 minutes, but make the first 30 to 60 seconds really punchy. There's a rule called the rule of primacy, and according to behavioural psychologists, those first words that come out of people's mouths are often quite memorable or are remembered by the audience, those first words. So they have impact. Start strong, grab attention straight away. Milo Frank said, if you don't grab your audience's attention within the first 30 to 60 seconds, you could spend the rest of your presentation trying to create relevance, trying to grab their attention. So it's that short, sharp opening sentence that grabs attention. I often start my presentations with a quote from James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader. James Earl Jones, the #1 voiceover artist on American commercial television. James Earl Jones said, "There's nothing harder than having words in your heart that you cannot utter. Nothing harder than having words in your heart that you're unable to speak." And of course, James Earl Jones was also a man who stuttered, and from the age of 7 to 17, he didn't speak for that 10-year period. He was mute because of his stutter, and then got into acting at about age 17 and found his voice. So that grabs people's attention straight away, and it's about speaking in a public speaking workshop. Don't start with housekeeping, as I did today. Good morning, everyone. My name's Peter Dew. Can I get you to turn off your mobile phones? The toilets are down the back to the left-hand side. We're going to have a break at morning tea at 10:15, etc. Apparently, according to the rule of primacy, apparently people are going to remember those words. So start strong. Script a 30 to 60 second opening that creates relevance, grabs attention, makes the audience sit up, makes the audience recognise they're in the right room. The rule of primacy. Now we're going to move to the end of the speech. How do you close your presentation? And of course, this is the rule of recency. Once again, behavioural psychologists say the most recent words tend to stick in people's memories. And why shouldn't they? They're the most recent words. So I guess at 5 minutes to 10 today, West Australian time, those words are closer than what I said at 9:05. So you're more likely to remember them. So it's the rule of recency. The most recent words you say will tend to stick in people's minds. So you need to make your ending memorable. Have a strong call to action, or leave them with a question, or leave them with a challenge. Script and write and learn your closing statement. If you only do one thing today, talk to your family, talk to your friends about occupational health and safety, or whatever your call to action is. If you only do one thing today, go home and write a letter to your local Member of Parliament to lobby for whatever your core message is. Once again, as with the opening, don't end with thank you or some other kind of platitudes. By that I mean, so thank you. You've been a wonderful crowd. It's been a pleasure training you today. Please have safe journeys home. I really look forward to working with you sometime in the future. Very polite, but I wouldn't end with that. I would bring that forward a little bit. So thanks, guys. It's been a wonderful webinar. Thank you for your engaging questions. Please attend more webinars in the future. Now, if you only do one thing today, make sure you're clear of what your purpose for speaking is. Every time you write a speech, start at the end. What do you want people to walk away with? So if you only do one thing today, every time you make a speech, be clear of your purpose. So go back to the ending. So that's the rule of primacy, the rule of recency. This is the beginning and this is the end. That should be 30 to 60 seconds, powerful, punchy and memorable, and because they're positioned where they are, they're likely to stick in people's minds. Okay. Any questions? I'm going to pause for a moment and just grab a drink of water. Please type those questions in. Please type your questions in. And someone's mentioned that your core message, question about core message and your purpose. The core message is the one thing that they remember and that is relevant to them. And yes, indeed, it links very closely to what your purpose is. So as people walk out the door, what do you want them to do? So in asking that first, what do I want to happen? What do I want the next steps to be? Then that answering that question, you can then work out what your core message is. So your core message should really lead us to walk out and do or remember or adopt your point of view around what your core purpose was. So the core message links to what you want to happen. But before trying to script or arrive at your core message, I'd be clear of your core purpose, i.e. what do you want people to do at the end of your seminar. We have another question. Beautiful. Thanks for that, Helena. The question is, should the beginning of my speech and the end of my speech carry the same core message? And that's a really wonderful way of doing it. It's called topping and tailing. So you're really saying the same information at the beginning and you're saying the same information at the end. But I wouldn't use the same words. The message would be the same. So the opening might be more of an attention grabber. So you might give some data, some statistics, some information that may shock people and let them know that there is an issue. 1 in 5 Australians will experience mental ill health at some stage in their life. That means every one of us on this webinar, either directly or indirectly, will be involved with a family member, a friend or a colleague that experiences mental ill health. So that's my opening. My conclusion. So with the incidence of mental ill health so high, in fact 1 in 5, all of us have an obligation to understand mental health first aid. Mental health first aid helps us understand if someone's struggling in the workplace, helps us support one of our family members at home. So mental health is a big issue in Australia. I'm asking all of you to become familiar with mental health first aid. Sort of same information, but there's more of a call to action in the closing. So I have topped and tailed my core message. Everyone needs to do a mental health first aid course, for example. I've built the imperative up front with some statistics, and my call to action is asking you to go out and to do it. And I probably would have given some stories in the middle that would have created an emotional experience for you, so that you may not remember exactly some of the data, but you remember that really, if you do this course, mental health first aid course, you'll be able to have some sort of impact. So thank you for that question from Helena. Okay, I've got another question. If you can think of a quote which expresses your core message, is that always a good idea? Look, I like starting with quotes. Another quote I use is another quote that I use is from Sir Winston Churchill. And Sir Winston Churchill said, if you can stand on your feet and speak to a group of people, then you possess a very powerful skill. I want to talk to you today about how you can overcome your fear of public speaking so that you can get your message across. And like Winston Churchill said, have that skill for job interview, that skill to influence, that skill to educate, that skill to persuade. If you can stand on your feet and confidently speak to a group of people, you possess a very powerful skill. So I love a quote that captures your core message by a reputable person if possible. Be careful with same cheesy quotes. So Winston Churchill may be a little bit overdone. James Earl Jones less so. Another way is, of course, start with an amazing statistic, an attention-grabbing statistic. 1 in 5 Australians will experience mental ill health at some stage. 15,000 West Australians are experiencing elder abuse at any one point in time. That's 15,000 people over the age of 65 are not living the lives that they would like to live. So a quote, a statistic that leads the way to your core message, I'd agree. That's a brilliant way to start. So thanks, Marie. Thank you for that. Any further questions? Also, you can start with a question, like a rhetorical question, that everyone wants to know the answer. If I could give you 3 steps that would help you, would that be of value to you? And then your core message is, well, everyone needs to do this. And then your points, your 3 points are the 3 steps. And then you can step down after that 30 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a real pleasure to be here today. Can I ask you to turn your mobile phones off? So start with your quote, start with your statistic, start with your attention-grabbing statement, your rhetorical question, and then leave them with that for a moment, then step down and do any housekeeping that you have to do. If you're in a seminar or a forum where there is an MC or a chairperson, it's really good if they can do the housekeeping. So much more effective. Then you can start strong and carry on message without having to step down. I run my workshops myself and I run a lot of seminars myself, so no one introduces me. So I have to, after starting and creating relevance, then step back and say, look, by the way, this is how today's going to run, and do that housekeeping. So you've got your core message. What I'd ask you to do now is look at 3 to 4 points that amplify or illustrate or lead us to your core message. I love 3 or 4 points. Behavioural psychologists say we can only remember, I think, 4 to 7 chunks of information at a time. So I'm very much in favour of trying to keep it simple. If you had 5 points, I would merge 2 points into one bigger point, and then feel free to have sub-points. The core, the 3 to 4 points should also amplify and lead us to the same purpose as we walk out that door. So everything is, I guess, adding to and reiterating your core message, but giving evidence or leading us more to believe or to accept or to acknowledge your core message. If your core message is one of persuasion or moving people to a different way of thinking, then the points are the evidence or the case studies or the anecdotes or the journals that lead you, the research that lead you to this shift in thinking. I love 3 points. The rule of 3 is simply that people remember 3 bits of information. It's rhythmical, it's memorable, and it just works. So I love the rule of 3. And generally when I'm writing a keynote speech, I would stick to 3 points. As I said, if you must go to more than 3, I would leave it at 4 maximum. Just to illustrate the rule of 3, just briefly, if I mentioned Goldilocks and 3 bears, if I mentioned 3 blind mice, if I mentioned 3 wise men, if I mentioned Baba black sheep, 3 bags full, if I mentioned the 3 little pigs, if I mentioned in a court of law you must tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If you ever listen to Steve Jobs on some of his YouTube videos where he's presenting at those Apple annual conferences, and every year they release a new product or they've got some new information, and Steve Jobs, 3 things I want to share with you today. We've got 3 exciting products that we want to launch today. At his keynote address at Stanford University at the graduation, he attended Stanford even though he did not graduate. Steve Jobs says, there's 3 stories I want to share with you today. The rule of 3, very powerful, extremely effective, and just creates more of a memorable message. So I guess what 3 bits of evidence, what 3 key points are you going to bring that lead us or show us the way to your core message? Now, let me just pick a random topic, something I know nothing about, in fact, something I'm not even good at. Let me pick time management. And so my core message is that everyone with effective time management skills can be more effective in the workplace, or can save themselves 20 minutes a day, or using 3 simple time management techniques, all of us can regain control of our work desk or our workflow or our home life or our work-life balance, depending on what flavour you want to put on your core message. The first point could be you need to learn to prioritise. You know, those lists of what you have to do, and that's Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Those things that are a high priority and are urgent. Those things that are urgent but not high priority, and those things that are high priority but they're not urgent, and just working out using that sort of grid as to what you want to get done today. So prioritise. The second thing is you need to learn to delegate. Delegate up to management, to your higher management. Sometimes you've got to delegate down. A lot of people can't say no, and they take on too much stuff. The third point might be use your technology. I can't always run face-to-face seminars. Let's use webinars. Microsoft Outlook, project management if you work in the project management field. Email smart. Be smart about your email. So much time wasted checking emails in real time. Put an auto out of office message. I check my emails twice a day. If you have anything urgent, call me. So there's a whole range of tools and software that you can use. So they're just 3 random points that I made up that could lead you to understand that if you do these things, you can grab hold of your work schedule and be more effective through good time management. There may be other things. So in prioritisation, you might have a couple of sub-points around prioritisation. So feel free to do that. Now, you need to use your stories. You need to build what I call a library of stories and a library of anecdotes. The beauty of telling your stories or using stories to illustrate points, and I could have used prioritisation, and I've got examples of when I've done really brilliant prioritisation and were very successful, got things done that I didn't believe that I could get done, and other things that I know that I need to get done, but they're just not on my priority list. I still need to get them done, but I don't know, I keep procrastinating, or I guess I get stuck analysing the problem, and then some easier things come up. So I've got all these stories around prioritisation. So the beauty of your stories when you're using them in a speech writing context is that your stories are, number one, they're your unique intellectual property. That means no one can tell you, no, that didn't happen, Peter. Well, that doesn't seem right to me, Peter. Well, that's really unbelievable. Are you sure that happened? Yes, I am sure that it happened. Let me give you a little bit more detail. Let me go back to the beginning of the story. Let me drill down further and give you a bit more data or a bit more evidence around my story. When you tell someone else's story, you can't drill down, you can't expand, you can't respond to left field questions as effectively as you can with your own story. So it's your unique intellectual property. You can use it in the science world as well. When you're looking at some new treatments, new behaviours, and your findings when talking to 100 people is that, well, let me tell you what this lady said to me again. Let me tell you what 100 people reported back to me, and this is why I'm bringing this to you. Sometimes you have to use research. You've got to use journal articles. You have to use case studies. Of course you use those. You bring those stories in. But your own stories are so much more powerful. They're your unique intellectual property. It's the first reason to collect stories. The second reason to collect stories is generally you don't have to write them down. You don't have to learn them. You don't have to script them. You don't have to memorize them. They happen to you. They're relevant to the point, and you can just tell it extemporaneously. You can tell it as it occurred. The level of detail you put into that story depends on the length of time. If you're speaking for 15 minutes, short, sharp stories, short, sharp anecdotes. If you're speaking for an hour, then the story stretches a little bit with a bit more detail. So your stories include your case studies, your examples, your anecdotes, your experiences. Collect quotes. James Earl Jones is a man who stutters. Winston Churchill is a man who stuttered. Me, Peter Dew, is a person who stutters still every day. So I just didn't collect any quotes. I collect quotes from men who stutter. Rowan Atkinson, Mr. Bean, is a man who stutters. So while they're not my unique stories, I can relate to them, and those quotes add intrigue and then also add interest to my presentations. Just another thing, this is a little bit of a segue, this is off the side. So starting with a quote, you may have noticed that I mentioned James Earl Jones. There's nothing harder than having words in your heart that you cannot utter. I start with that quote. I also start with the Winston Churchill quote. So Winston Churchill said, if you can stand on your feet and speak to a group of people, then you possess a very powerful skill. That's how I start in a public speaking workshop. I then go on and tell my story as a person who stutters, my struggle, and how I now do public speaking for my living. And that gives people hope. People now realise if this person who stutters can now do public speaking, then, gee, we in the room who fear or who don't like public speaking can also do it. So I also, with my own story, give you hope. What I then do is I then go back to my opening quotes and say, by the way, James Earl Jones also stuttered. By the way, Winston Churchill also stuttered. And people suddenly realise that the people that I've quoted are men that have walked the same journey as I am walking at the moment. Yes, a long time ago, and yes, they're very famous people. Nobody's heard of me, I'm not famous, but I've chosen men who stutter. And that's called creating a loop. And then I close that loop when I say James Earl Jones stuttered. Winston Churchill stuttered. So feel free to open with a quote, tell some stuff, give some information. Maybe later on you might say, oh, and by the way, I am one of those people in that statistic that I opened with. That's called creating a loop. So build your library of stories, build your quotes. I often talk about the role of fear in public speaking. Fear is normal in public speaking. You're not likely to completely be free of fear, nor do I want you to. And I use a couple of newspaper articles that I have collected. One of them is from Sally Pearson. Sally Pearson won the 110-metre Olympics hurdles for the women, gold medal Olympian Australian. Sally Pearson was interviewed before the final and she said, "Yes, of course I'm nervous. I'm glad to have nerves today. If I did not have nerves today, I would not be ready to race." If you don't have nerves before public speaking, then you're probably not ready to speak. If Sally Pearson had been completely calm, she would have missed the starter's gun. She would have been in a flat, blasé, low energy state. Ringo Starr, I read in the newspaper a while back, still experiences stage fright. Ringo Starr, the drummer for the Beatles, says it takes him 10 to 15 minutes before he gets control of his heart rate and he starts to relax and feel at ease with his drumming. So the first 10 to 15 minutes is a complete blur and Ringo Starr is dying in front of the audience. That doesn't detract from him being an effective drummer. Your nerves don't detract from you being an effective public speaker. So collect your quotes, collect your anecdotes, case studies, examples, but your stories are so much more powerful. Use positive and negative stories. Not every story has a positive ending, but in the negative outcomes where the project was unable to be brought back on track, where the project still went over budget, where the interpersonal conflict was not able to be resolved, there are lessons and learning in those stories. When you tell a story, the stories need to link back to your point. So you got point one, you might have 2 or 3 stories. One might be your own example, one might be a case study, and one might be a quote that all illustrates point one. Point 2, have another couple of stories or an anecdote or a quote or some data. So the stories are not just to entertain, the stories are to illustrate a point. So you make a story, you tell a story, you make a point, the point links back to your core message. Tell a story, make a point within the story, and the point links back to one of the points in your core message. Use your stories. The other beauty with your stories is your stories, now you've got a bank, you've got a library of stories for each point. You can now target your stories for a particular audience. You know who you're speaking to. What are their values? What are their mission statements? What industry are they in? What language do they use? Then you pick the right stories from your library of stories that use the right language, that are appropriate for that industry. The anecdotes, the data, the quote, even the humour matches the people in the room. The stories you use demonstrate that your values are in line with the values of the people in the room. So you can target, you can bring it in and have audience-specific examples. If you have a mixed audience, then you need to have more general examples. A little bit of a financial story, a little bit of a health story, a little bit of a disability story. I work a lot with the not-for-profit sector, so a lot of people within the disability, the aged care and the health sector. But I also work with financial planners. I also work with accountants in training them in public speaking. So my disability stories are less appropriate and I have to come out with my financial stories. And one of them is that my father died without a will. So my dad died intestate. So me as the eldest son and the executor of my father's will had all these problems to deal with. Sorry, the older son, not the executor, because there was no will, but I had to sort this out because mum was unable to. I was executor of my mother's will. I learnt, and financial planners will tell you, have you got a will? So mixed audience, I'll bring in mixed stories. Health audience, health stories. Build your library of stories. Collect those newspaper articles. Collect that stuff that you can use. I'm going to pause for a moment, grab a drink of water. Please type in those questions. Or put your hand up and I'll open up your microphone. Any questions? And yes, the word stories is the loose term of the stories. It's your case studies. It's the people you've worked with. And the stories can not only come from work. There's stuff that's happened in your everyday life that you can also use and bring in. And it may be that you're involved with a sporting club, you're involved with a service club, you're involved bringing up children, and children sometimes say profound things, and they're great challenges. And we've all got brilliant lessons from our children, and I'm quite happy to weave those in to make a point. Any other questions? Okay. Feel free to still type in questions as we move along. So I'm going to give you a safe and simple structure. In fact, I'm going to give you a couple of simple structures from what we've covered. So all I'm going to do is take all the material we've covered and put it in a structure for you to use. So this is the simple structure. We could put the staircase off to the side here. What do we want people to walk out with? Script our 30 to 60 second closing, script our 30 to 60 second opening. Rule of primacy, rule of recency. The two questions, first question, what do I want them to remember unequivocally? And the second question, why does it matter to them? What's in it for me? Why do I care as an audience member? These merge into your core message that runs all the way through your speech. Yes, your opening and your closing can use the same core message or the same information. That's called topping and tailing. And then build a library of stories, examples, and anecdotes that you can weave around your points. And in a longer speech, you will do 3 to 4 stories, 3 to 4 bits of evidence per point. In a 20-minute keynote, same structure, but 1 bit of evidence per point. Very flexible structure. Let's say you were scheduled to speak for an hour, so you've got 3 stories per point, 3 bits of evidence that you're going to give. You've got your closing, you've got your opening, you know what you want to leave them with. The speaker before you goes 20 minutes over time. You're now speaking for 40 minutes instead of 60 minutes. Just give 2 stories per point. Shed 1 anecdote per point. The structure's the same, the impact is the same, and we walk out with that same core message. Let's say you do have a 45-minute speech organised. The speaker before you doesn't turn up and the organiser wants you to stretch for an extra 15 to 20 minutes. Just chuck in another anecdote, another story per point. So you're now giving 3 or 4 bits of evidence per point. So that's what I call a framework. That's a skeleton that you can hang any speech on. And the other way, of course, is a mind map. So the same structure, but some people like mind mapping. So write down the word that captures your strong opening. Learn it scripted. It may be a quote. It may be some data. Same with your memorable closing. Be careful of your core message. What is it? What do you want them to remember, and why is it important to them? I've shown 4 points here. And then for each point, have however many sub-points or stories you want. Tell a story, make a point. The point links back to the point that runs through your core message. that leads us to your core message. That's mind mapping. So when I practice a keynote presentation, I don't practice at the word processor. I don't keep rewriting scripts. I make sure that I got my opening nice, sharp, tight, and it's memorable, and I test it on people. I test it on audiences. I also script and learn my conclusion. I also test it, make sure it has impact. I know what my core message is. I know what 3 or 4 points I'm going to use. So now I've just got my bank of stories. And my stories, I can remember them, so I don't need to write them all that much. So I would put this framework on a big sheet of paper, an A3 sheet of paper. This kind of framework, or if you prefer the other one, that kind of framework, on that big A3 or even an A1, so poster-sized bit of paper, I put it on the floor. And as I'm standing up practicing on my feet, so I'm not practicing at my word processor, as I'm practicing on my feet, I can just glance down and look at where I am in my structure or my mind map. The first iteration, the first go, feel free to put more detail, a few more words, the data, the statistics, put more stuff. And then once you've done it a couple of times on your feet, then reduce that to a less informative skeleton and then run it again with this second iteration, the second version with less words, and just glance down to the floor if you need it again. What I would then do is then convert this to an A4, so one A4 sheet that I will take to my keynote speech with me. And then what I find is 99.9% of the time, in my mind, I bring up that A3, that A1 sheet that's on the floor, and I can see everything in my mind map. And if I get stuck, I pause, I have a drink of water, I walk over to the lectern and I look down at my A4 mind map or my A4 skeleton. Practice on your feet, guys, rather than practicing rewriting, rescripting at the word processor, trying to get fancier, more pretty PowerPoint presentations. If any of you are interested in speech writing and how to write a killer speech, I am running a workshop in Perth on the 20th of November. It's a full-day workshop, and at that workshop I provide you with the full workbook, which you can use over and over again to write a speech, and the audio CD. Some people like to work through a workbook. Some people like to go through the speech listening to the CD. That's available if anyone's interested. And that would, and most people walk away when they do that workshop, they walk away with a speech ready to go. So it's not a theoretical workshop. The idea is come along with that wedding speech, my daughter's wedding speech I spoke about, or that awards presentation that you have to give or maybe you might receive. You come along with that idea and you walk away with a nice, usable, tight, sharp speech. Any questions just before I sum up and talk a little bit about the next webinar that I'm going to run for those of you who are interested? Type those questions in. And yes, both the book and the CD come in a package, and you can order them online or feel free to send me an email. The CD also, as well as an audio CD that talks you through a speech, asks those questions, also has a PDF version of the book. So the book that you buy, don't write into it, the workbook, don't write into it. Keep it as a pristine copy on your shelf and print a PDF workbook every time you want to do a new speech. Put the CD in, print another template and write speech. So that's how you use the book, the workbook and the audio CD. I've got a question. Do I recommend not to use PowerPoint when presenting, having a speech? Thanks for that question, Helena. No, I don't. It's up to you. I recommend, PowerPoint's a really good tool. I recommend having multiple visuals. I use Whiteboard, I use Flipchart, and I also show some PowerPoint slides. one of the things I recommend is you don't leave your PowerPoint slides up. So I also teach people how to effectively use PowerPoint. One of the things is you don't leave your PowerPoint slides up. So here we're in Q&A and I'm talking and everyone's looking at a visual that's got nothing to do with my answer. So in a presentation, I'd bring that PowerPoint slide down, and the way you do that is you hit B for black. I don't know if it works on webinars. It does indeed. So I've just hit B on my keypad. Nothing's gone to sleep. You're now just looking at a black slide. So now everyone's eyes are at me. So I'm not saying don't use PowerPoint. Hit B again and the slide comes back. What I'm saying is learn to use PowerPoint slides effectively. Don't do bullet points. Bullet points with words is shooting your audience to death. Use something like I'm showing you now. Use a diagram, use an image, use a mind map. Don't do bullet points with just words, and don't read off your PowerPoint slides. So I've got no script with this. The PowerPoint slides are my prompt. They're my audio visual, and whatever comes out of my mouth on the day, I guess, is right. So Microsoft did some research, guys, a few years ago. Every day around the world, there's 30 million PowerPoint presentations being delivered. I'm not sure if that includes Keynote or Prezi or other presenting software, but 30 million PowerPoint presentations, of which 29 million fail to have the impact that the presenter, that the author wanted. So you've got about a 1 in 30 chance of having impact with PowerPoint. So use it, but use it wisely, use it professionally. Don't put your website, don't put your logo, don't put page numbers on every slide. Your PowerPoint slide should pop. So people should look at it and they should see, aha, we're now in Q&A, as opposed to, are there any questions? This is a question and answer session. So do use PowerPoint, use it wisely, use it cautiously, invest some time in how to use PowerPoint effectively. I do coaching and I do work around PowerPoint, and in my presentation skills workshop, I demonstrate how to use PowerPoint, and I also spend a little bit of time at the end of every workshop on how to effectively use PowerPoint. And there's lots of other tricks like the B button for black. There's now nothing on the screen. This is in the seminar room. Everyone's eyes are now looking at you. Bring it back when you want it. Okay, thank you for those questions. Moving on, I've got some workshops coming up. You find these at my website, www.peterdew.com.au/events. As I mentioned, the How to Write a Killer Speech is coming up in Perth on the 20th. The Winning Presentation Skills, where you learn a little bit about PowerPoint, is in Perth on the 12th of November. I've got workshops in Shepparton, Melbourne and Ballarat, and also Bunbury coming up. I'm not going to spend any time on that. You feel free to go through there and look at those workshops yourself. Happy to run an in-house workshop. So if you had 6 to 15 people, 6 would be the minimum. It is still financially viable to bring me in-house for 6 people in a in-house corporate workshop. Feel free to email me. Webinar next week, job interview tips. So how to present, how to prepare for job interviews. So this is the spoken word, a little bit about body language, a little bit about non-verbal communication so that you're effective at job interview tips. The first 15 seconds, guys, your body language, your non-verbals is speaking volumes. You might nail the questions, but you may have already lost the job interview in the first 15 seconds. Feel free to contact me, info@peterdew.com.au. You've got my website there. I'm interested to know what you want to hear from me. What webinars could I do that would be of value to you guys? And be quite happy to take any feedback from today's webinar. So, spend time working on your presentation, your script. Begin at the end. What do you want to happen? Be clear on what your core purpose is and make sure you have that lovely sharp beginning, the rule of primacy, and that ending, the rule of recency. 3 to 4 points. I love 3 points. And then weave your stories, your anecdotes, your case studies around each of those key points that bring us to your core message. Don't practice at the word processor, practice on your feet.